Okay.
All right, I think we're about ready to start. Thank you, Professor Kaplan, again for joining us. Um, I don't know if you want to still do like a quick introduction since Mr. Ganley just did that.
Yeah, and then
Or
let's just get into the meat of it.
okay, all right, cool. So let's get to the first question. So
Mhm.
you've consistently defended free trade and opposed policies such as tariffs, minimum wage, the rent control, and other price controls, even when they're extremely popular with students and voters. Why
Mhm.
do these interventions remain so intuitively appealing despite the economic arguments against them? And what trade-offs do you think are most systematically overlooked when people evaluate them?
Yeah, great question. So I actually just put a relevant piece in the comments if you want to read more. Here's my story. Basic economics is not
Mhm.
counterintuitive, it's counter emotional. There's a big difference. Saying that if you raise the price of something, people will want to buy less, that is completely intuitive, but it bothers people. They don't like hearing it. They don't like hearing that if we pass a law saying that rent is going to be zero, that then there's going to be blowback from that. But the idea that there would be makes perfect sense. So, I mean, this is really clear for price controls, where if you say, look, if you push the price down, then the number of people that want the product will go up. The number of people who want to sell the product will go down, and there's going to be a shortage of the product. I can't think of any argument, at least very hard to think of any argument that is more straightforward, more intuitive. The reason people don't buy it is because it just is bitter. So that's my story.
All right, thank you so much. So this one is a little bit of a longer question. It's kind of three parts,
Mm-hmm.
but
All right, first
liber
part.
yeah, libertarian arguments for markets are often easiest to see in competitive industries, but much more controversial in
Mm-hmm.
areas such as road, transit, and utilities, and other
Mm-hmm.
large-scale infrastructure, where
Mm-hmm.
economies of scale and network effects are significant. How do you think privatization should go in these sectors, and how would such systems realistically be financed and governed in practice, and what
Mm-hmm.
institutional frameworks, if any, remains for the state beyond enforcing property rights and contracts?
Yeah, great. All right. So the question of monopoly is a huge one, but let me just focus on something that everybody knows about. All right, Amazon.com. It is the greatest store in the history of the world. Almost everyone spends a lot of money there in the United States and really around the world. It is hard to even explain what would is the next best thing to Amazon. Like if Amazon didn't exist, what would take its place? It seems like it fits normal standards of monopoly, and yet it works great. The prices are low, the quality is high, fantastic customer service. So there's got to be something wrong with the popular view that monopoly is automatically bad and serves consumers poorly. The standard story here, which it's not original to me, it's just something that a lot of people have said, but maybe I take it more seriously than others, is that Amazon is constrained by potential competition. Amazon is worried that if they stop doing a good job, competition will arrive. And that is a deep idea to realize that even if an industry does not show an actual greater than one number of firms there, does not mean that they are not actually very worried about serving consumers. The key issue there is potential competition available? Normally, of course, like if it's something that anyone else in the world could do, it's like, well, of course there could be someone else could do it. If Amazon were totally dropping the ball, then other firms would show up. So the really obvious thing is it legal to compete? Is it legal to compete? This is one of the greatest cases of chutzpah in economic policy, where people talk about government as if it is there to maintain competition. And the reality is that government often will just say competition is not legal. We are not going to give permission to go and do anything. And then when monopoly comes along, people act as if it is the normal working of the market. This is most clear right now for the construction industry, which is strangled in regulation. When you see really high prices for rent or high prices for sale, you might think that there's some kind of business conspiracy. The reality is, businesses are begging government to give them all the paperwork they need to build stuff. It's just really hard to get, and there's so many rules, and often you need to get paperwork from two or three different kinds of different levels of government. So that's what I would say is the main thing. For utilities, it's more complicated because there are some actual physical limits to potential competition. But unfortunately, I don't think we got time for that. But I mean, like the really big thing to understand about competitions is not just the same as having a bunch of firms. It can all you can have one firm doing a great job, but looking behind their backs for other firms that might enter if they don't do a good job.
Okay, thank you so much. The next part to that was going to be what role do you think government would play beyond property rights and contracts in that? Do you think that government has any role, or that it should just totally be absent from that?
Right. Yeah. So I just finished a book on this that's going to be published by the University of Chicago called Unbeatable, the Brutally Honest Case for Free Markets. Um, Main thing that I have to say about that is there's a long list of big things the government does where the arguments are really bad. And even though it's very unpopular, I think there should be a drastic rollback of government. And then there's some other issues that are really complicated and hard. And my inclination is say get rid of government there too, but I don't have that great of an argument. So, in terms of the really bad things that government does, all right, first really bad thing the government does, government for bans virtually all immigration. Have you ever heard that like we have open borders? That is completely wrong. It is crazy. There are hundreds of millions of people who would like to come, and doing so legally is almost impossible. Really, the debate about immigration is just within a fairly small range, but almost all immigration is just by default illegal. And the economics of this are really very simple. If you let in someone from a third world country into the first world, it is normal that their earnings multiply 5 times, 10 times, 15 times. The reason is that labor is much more productive in rich countries than in poor countries. And so this is a big set of regulations that is trapping most human talent in places where it's unproductive. The way I explain it in my book, Open Borders, is it's like imagine we got a billion people stuck in Antarctica, right? If you just sign the paperwork and say they can leave, then they can go and contribute a lot more to the world, which is obviously good for them, but it's also good for all their customers. The arguments about immigration go on forever. We could talk about it all day, but what really helps to focus our thinking is a simple rule. I'll say this is the number one principle of economics. The secret of mass consumption is mass production. Countries are rich when they produce a lot of stuff per person. They are poor when they don't. There are virtually no exceptions to this rule. If you want your country rich, you need to produce a lot of stuff. Any argument about how we need to save jobs or this is a dangerous technology really just comes down to focusing on some small downside and neglecting the big picture. These arguments really are as bad as saying 150 years ago, we don't want to destroy farm jobs with mechanization of agriculture. It's like, yeah, like we're going to lose a ton of jobs for the mechanization of agriculture, and that's going to be fantastic because the people that lose their jobs will find something else to do, and we're going to have way more food, and we're going to solve this horrible problem humanity has faced for as long as anyone can remember, for all of history, of just not having enough food to eat. Uh, the book goes through a bunch of other big policies that I say are a giant waste. Just to give you one other one that I think is pretty easy to understand, even though horrifies people, but that's what I do. All right. So universal redistribution, government programs where the government gives money to everybody. That's like Social Security. As long as you get to that age, you get the money. Doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are, everybody gets it. And this is just a crazy idea. And if you were a billionaire, you had $8 billion to give away, would you give $1 to every person on earth? Right? What a wasteful way to do charity. The sensible thing is to focus the money on where it's actually going to do the most good. But we waste trillions of dollars every year on these universal programs instead of saying, well, most people can take care of themselves, so they shouldn't get anything. So that's mostly where I'll go with that. But it's obviously a huge issue.
Yeah, that kind of ties into my next question about welfare in the
Uh,
Scandinavian countries.
uh-huh.
So In discussions of poverty and social policy, many students point to the Scandinavian countries as
Mhm.
evidence that large welfare states, free or heavily subsidized healthcare, and free college can work well. From a
Mhm.
libertarian perspective, how
Yeah.
can we interpret those cases? And do
Mhm.
you think the goal of policy should be to reduce wealth inequality itself or
Okay.
primarily to expand opportunity for all?
Mhm. Right. So, what I would say about Scandinavia in general, I mean, really, if you wanted to talk about the best Scandinavian country, it's clearly Norway and not Sweden, because Norway has a ton of oil money, which allows them to go and spend a lot without actually burdening the population nearly as much. But anyway, the main thing I'd say about all those countries is they're not good. They're mediocre. They're okay. I've been there. They're okay. They're nothing special. Right now, what's wrong with them, or what are the main issues? I think the main issue is they have enormous taxes, which means that people are paying a pile of money to the government, and most of the money is just wasted. Right? How so? So they have a lot of universal programs. That means that they have really high taxes. They take money from everyone and give it to everyone, messing up incentives along the way. Why is that a good program? Why is that a good system? It sounds good. People like the idea. Oh, this way everyone's guaranteed. It's like, would you take half of people's money and then you hurt work incentives and then you give it back to them? Like, congratulations. Why is that a especially good policy? So yeah, I would say that you just go there and see for yourself. Go to their grocery stores. Like, they're not actually living that well. Even Norway, the grocery stores are very unimpressive, and so I would really focus on that. In terms of, like, should government focus on reducing wealth inequality? All this is based on this idea government is doing that right now. Like, actual major government policies greatly increase inequality. So immigration restrictions drastically increase inequality. They keep desperately poor people in their home country suffering when they could move to rich countries and have a way better standard of living. And this is not some small little counterexample. This is one of the main things that government does. Government also, they heavily regulate construction, which means that housing is way more expensive than it needs to be. And housing is a necessity. It's something that everybody consumes. Poor people spend a larger share of their income on it than rich people. So this is a big area of government that is increasing inequality. Same thing with government regulation of nuclear power. Energy, like housing, it's a necessity. Poor people spend a larger share of their income on energy than rich people. Nuclear power is the safest, cleanest, and when lightly regulated, the cheapest kind of energy ever discovered by far. Governments make it almost impossible to do it. And this is really bad for not only people in general, but it's especially bad for the poor because energy, like I said, is a necessity. Um, so we could go on, but the idea that people have of government is here going and reducing inequality, it just is based upon only looking at some of the things government does and not looking at the whole picture. Um, there are some things the government does that reduce inequality, though even those, the when you really look at the math, it's much smaller than it seems. Social Security, again, is a really nice example because the whole idea of Social Security is everybody gets it, doesn't matter how rich or poor you are, and you get it as long as you live. Important thing to understand is that rich people live a lot longer than poor people. And so, with programs like Social Security, government is paying rich people for many more years than it's paying poor people. And over the last 20 years, the life expectancy gap between rich and poor, especially rich men and poor men, has gotten much bigger. A lot of that is opioids, alcohol abuse, suicide. But your bottom line is that there's now something like a 15-year gap in life expectancy between the richest quintile and poorest quintile. So the latest math, Social Security no longer looks like it's actually redistributive anymore. Um, so this is not what propaganda says, but this is not something I'm making up. You can go to chats and just ask what's really going on, and I think it will tell you the same thing I'm telling you.
All right. So the next question is kind of ties into your book, The Case Against Education.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
So the question goes as follows. Your work argues that much of formal education functions more as signaling than as human capital formation.
Yep.
What does that imply for current education policy and for government involvement in higher education? And more broadly, do you think a fully market-based K through 12 system potentially replacing traditional public schools with universal school choice or government-funded vouchers for families would produce better outcomes? And how should students
Right.
think about their own education in light of the signaling model?
All right, right. So just to back up, I'm taking a look at you guys right now. You're learning about economics, and then the question is, yeah, how many of you are going to wind up becoming professional economists? All right. So just sidebar, economics is the highest paid of all the easy majors. As long as you can do math reasonably well, I consider it almost a no-brainer in terms of like anyone who's like, well, what major do I do? I don't know. Well, in that case, can you do math? Okay, yes, then do economics because it really is an incredible deal where like, our graduates make only like 10% less money than engineers, and they have like 10 times the free time of engineers while they're in school. But any case, just to understand, right, there is a common view that you get from teachers, parents, politicians saying that what you're doing right now is you're learning useful job skills. Like, isn't that crazy? Like, what are the odds that you're actually going to use any of this stuff in real life? Think about whatever other classes you're doing today. I don't know, you're going to analyze a poem for money one day, right? It's like that's just not the way the world works. There's hardly any money in poetry, and yet I'm guessing you guys have had to read a bunch of poems. And so, what's going on? So, and so you might say, well, it's just useless, and there's no point being here, but that's wrong too, because the evidence that getting more education actually causes your income to go up is really strong. So it's like, so why do we make more money for going and learning a bunch of stuff that we don't really use? And there is a story in economics called signaling that says, look, the real reason why education pays is not generally that you're learning useful skills. There's something useful you learn, but it's not that much. The real reason is to get a stamp on your forehead, certified grade A worker. And that certification is what allows you to not get your applications for jobs thrown in the trash when you're looking for a job. All right. So, anyway, I have a whole book on this. It's called The Case Against Education. And the point of the book is not that you guys should drop out. The point of the book, rather, is that this is a wasteful system, that we have this big rat race where we really encourage people to get a lot of years of education, stay in school, excel. And the main result of all this is not that we get a really skilled workforce. The main result is credential inflation. This is where you need to have a college degree to get the same job that your parents or grandparents could have gotten with a high school degree. Or again, these days, you might need to have a graduate degree, have a PhD to get a job that your grandfather or great grandfather could have gotten right out of high school. Right? The world really did used to work this way, where it used to be that high-ranking business managers might not even have a high school degree. Right? And how do they do their jobs without all that important knowledge? Like they learn by doing, not by listening to someone give lectures and doing homework assignments, which is the main way people actually learn. Right. So, anyway, if this story doesn't mean that it's a good idea for you to drop out, what does it mean? It means that it's a good idea for government to stop encouraging education so much. Right. Because as you might have noticed, government very heavily encourages education. They provide basically all the funding for K through 12 for public schools. They heavily subsidize college. And my story is it would be a better world if we spent a lot less money on this stuff, right? And ended it sooner, and people just started working at an earlier age, right? And if you just think without this government funding, then I couldn't be here. It's like, yeah, that might be true. You wouldn't need to be there. You'd be doing a job right now and learning real stuff and making actual money. So that's my story.
Would you think that it would be better if it were privatized or if it was just
Mhm.
funded less by government?
Yeah, both. Like the big issue is cutting spending so that people go and finish sooner. That's the main problem. Because look, my whole story is just there's way too much education because most of it is not, in fact, very useful. There's a lot of ways that you could spend less. All right, so one is just to say, look, we're not going to be spending as much money on it. We're cutting the total budget. Another one is raise standards and then flunk people out. Say, look, you can't keep studying a foreign language unless you are really learning the language. Like we are just going to fail you. We're not going to let you be in music unless you can actually play your instrument well, and so on. So There's a lot of ways of doing that. You could just say, we're no longer going to go and teach anything except the hard subjects. So from now on, it's just going to be math and science and so literacy, literacy and numeracy, that's all we do. Everything else isn't really belong to school anyway. It's a waste of time. So we're not going to do that anymore. A lot of ways you can do it. The main advantage of something like a voucher system or private education was revealed during COVID when private schools reopened almost instantly and public schools dragged their feet often for years. So it's true that when there is competition, then you do get some improvements. But still, I'm not going to say that private school is that much different from public school in terms of wasting most of your time teaching you stuff you don't really need to know in real life.
Okay, and now on to the advice for students. So,
Uh-huh.
for many students who are interested in economics and public policy but are encountering arguments from this perspective for the first time, what
Uh-huh.
do you think is the most important habit of thinking that they should develop or change early on in their educational career?
Yeah. I think probably the deepest one is stop thinking that the truth has to be pretty. The truth is often really ugly. If you listen to politicians talk or debates, essentially what they're saying is just a bunch of feel good stuff that to go and please the crowd. And whether it's true or not is pretty much the last thing on their minds. And if you want to understand the world, you just have to get out of that mentality and just say, look, I don't care whether it sounds good or not. Step one is it true? Is it actually true? There's a name for this problem in psychology. It's called social desirability bias. Basically means when the truth is ugly, people lie. And often the lies are just so ubiquitous that people stop even thinking about it in terms of truth or falsehood. So, like a really easy version of this would be like, am I fat? All right. There's only one socially acceptable answer to am I fat, right? It's like, no, of course not. You're beautiful just the way you are. But some people are fat, and that's just a harsh reality, right? And same thing with so many of the issues in economics, well, why is it that so many people in the United States are poor? It's like it's a rich country, and like first step is, well, actually, by world and historic standards, hardly anyone is poor here. It's mostly just people raising the bar every time things improve so that we will never solve the poverty problem because we'll just refuse to go and say it's been solved. If you have heard in a history class what life actually used to be like, where poor people didn't have enough food, it's like, well, now virtually everybody has enough food. In fact, obesity is more common among the poor than among the rich. And then so what does that mean? It means, yeah, like in terms of poverty as people traditionally understood it, it's basically solved and they in rich countries. And then it's like, all right, so well, what do we say then? Well, don't, at least worth going and pointing out this reality, uh, which, what do you have to gain from it? It's like, well, the only thing you really have to gain is you're describing the world correctly. It's not going to make you friends probably, but if you want to understand what's really going on, that is a good path to follow. And then, so okay, well, fine, but like, why is it that some people are still doing at least relatively poorly? It's like, well, there's some pretty simple research on this saying, yeah, like if you do the following three things in the United States, you will almost certainly be above the poverty line. So one is finish high school, second is work full time, third is don't have kids until you're married. Right. So do those three things, and the odds that you will ever be below the poverty line are rock bottom. So it's like, so what can we do about poverty? It's like, well, you could just have each person not do those three things, and then the problem's almost solved, which many people don't like. But again, it's like, what's wrong with that? It's true. Uh, so that's probably the biggest thing is just accepting that the truth is often really ugly and realizing that if the truth is ugly, then there's going to be a lot of propaganda pretending otherwise because people don't want to face facts and just stare ugly reality in the face. Um, let's see. So yeah, so why don't I leave it there so that you guys can ask questions?
Yeah. So now we're opening it to Q&A. So anyone who has a question can raise their hand and ask Professor Caplan a question. Be honest, say whatever actual.
Yeah. You cannot hurt my feelings. Whatever you want to say. I'm an open book.
Come up here and ask a question. Just so that way he can hear.
Yeah. Good afternoon. I'd like to ask you, like, I heard you talk about like how the government should like stop like funding so much education.
Mhm.
Like it's what do you think like what subjects do you think school do you feel like are irrelevant but should be
Oh,
like
wow. It's easier to do it the other way, but most obvious candidate is foreign language. All right, foreign language in America, we have data. Basically, 0 people in America actually learn to speak a foreign language in school. So, what's the point? Like, there's no jobs for people who can like speak half of a foreign language, right? That's not so. Like, if you're not fluent, it's a waste of time, and almost no one achieves fluency. So, yeah, foreign language is just a waste. Let's see. Uh, then you've got a bunch of subjects where many people say, well, it's not meant to train people, it's because it's fun. And yet, for a lot of people, it's not fun. So, for example, music, right? Often required in schools. And the official stories, it's fun, but actually, a lot of students are suffering. I know. So, like, my sons actually were at a school where they had 3 required music classes. They had chorus, music appreciation, and dance. They hit it all 3. They weren't, you don't need to know this stuff. And most of at least the boys in the class felt the same way. They just hated this stuff. And it was required. And it's like, why? Like, if people actually enjoy it, then at least I'll say, like, it's not useful, but at least you're having fun. That's better than nothing. But honestly, so much of the stuff they put you through, it's not useful and it's not fun. Like other subjects. So, like history, most people like a lot of time, history, civics, stuff people put a lot of time into it, but barely learn anything. Again, how do we know? Well, in my book, I go over what adults know about US history, about civics, and basically the typical American adult knows next to nothing. They spent years studying it, they know next to nothing. Either they never really learned anything or they just forgot, which is the normal thing that happens. Just think about classes that you've had and then you stop doing them. And then a year later, if you had to take the final exam again, probably you'd fail it because you've just forgotten. If you don't keep using your knowledge, it falls out of your head. And that is the main thing that we're seeing. Media more generally, there's a lot of subjects where they are useful for a small number of people who are great at them, and for everyone else, it's a waste of time. So, like science, it's great for the very top people in the class that really want to be professional scientists. For everybody else, barely matters. And if you say, well, but we don't know what we're really good at, honestly, we can find out what people are good at pretty well. Just give people a math test. And if you can't, or if you are not way above average in math, you will never be a scientist. It's just fact.
Okay, so we have one more question
Uh-huh.
from our club advisor.
Yes.
And then we'll begin to wrap it up.
Okay, sounds
And
good.
with all that being said, as a history teacher and having a couple history teachers in the room, don't worry, we're not offended. It's been a problem that it's real, what you notice, and it's something we've been having our department meetings and our discussions is how do we make this relevant to students? The truth is, if you want a random historical fact, you could pull out your phone and look that up, and many people will do that. How do we make it useful? How can we build in a history class or even in English classes or anything us teachers could do to give students something out of the class? We like to tell ourselves that we're going to try to teach them how to analyze information, or if you're not, even if the content of whatever book you're reading in English is not important, it's important that they learn how to read, how to make arguments. Is there any skills that we can be setting up to help prepare students for vocation?
Sure. Honestly, I'm in the same position as you are. So college students are just kids that were high school students a few years ago. In terms of making it relevant to them, like the honest answer is most of it is just never going to be relevant for most people. What I really try to do is just make it entertaining. I just try to say, look, we have this time together. I don't think that I'm going to be able to turn labor economics into a paying gig for most of you. But what I can do is make it fun. I try to come with a lot of energy. You seem like you got a lot of energy, and just say, look, to me, this is amazing, fascinating material. Like this is we're unlocking the secrets of the world. These are ways that we can apply it to daily life. And I get rated as being unusually entertaining for a professor. I'm obviously not so entertaining that people are coming in off the streets just to listen to me, which I totally allow, actually. Like anyone who wants to sit in is welcome to do so. We get a few people auditing. But like honestly, a lot of it is just taking the energy up a lot and not, so the teacher themselves to care about the material is my thing. By the way, so I love history. I love history.
Yes, I know.
It's a fascinating subject. It's not something that is going to, teach you the secrets of how to go and do a business startup or to become a good worker. It's stuff where it's like there's a tiny number of people that are professional historians. There's a much larger group that teach history. And then, like for everybody else, if it isn't entertaining, then it's nothing for them, I'm afraid.
Well, thank you so much. I think that's a great place to end it. We
Okay,
appreciate you very much
Sure
for
thing.
coming. And does everyone else want to just give them a round of applause? And
All right.
there we go.
Thanks a lot.
See you.